Hello there, and welcome back to the show. Today, what we're doing is I've taken a recording from Confidence Week that I've been running this week. We had a special Bootcamp mentor panel conversation this week, and I thought it was so much more than just Confidence Week that I wanted to share it with all of you. So, what we're going to do is listen to the panel. I have two folks who've been through Bootcamp and are now peer mentors in the program. And we touch on a lot of different topics, but the biggest theme that goes through it is going from that feeling imposterish, which so many of us do, going from that feeling to embracing seeing ourselves as leaders, coming through and feeling that confidence. Now, this is a longer episode today. We're getting into the hour territory, so you may want to listen to it and then put a little bookmark to come back to it later if that's too much to listen in one go. That is perfectly fine. But really have a listen to it. I do encourage you to listen to the whole thing because we do touch on a lot of different topics that you'll want to hear about in terms of feeling more confident and how to balance high expectations with that self-compassion, giving yourself space to grow. We get into topics like celebrating your wins as much as getting out of your comfort zone. And we definitely speak to how do you even make time and why is it important to make time and space for personal and professional development when it just feels like there's absolutely no time to get that done. And a couple of times throughout the conversation, we touch on aspects of boot camp. So if you've been thinking about boot camp, it's on your mind or on your heart to check it out, then you really want to listen to this and hear what Jennifer and Leslie have to say about their experiences because they're going to be your mentors in the program. So you get a chance to listen to them. So with that, let's kick things off and get it started. Well, hey there. I'm Liz St. Jean, and this is the Rise in Your 9 to 5 podcast, where I help quietly ambitious leaders who want to have meaningful and fulfilling careers, making an impact in the world. It's where strategy meets intuition to become a better leader with more joy, less stress, and endless impact. So let's break free from perfectionism, imposter thoughts, and that inner rule keeper that keeps you in a career comfort zone. It's time to become unapologetically you and step into the life you are meant to live. We're going to talk presence, productivity, and having it all. Or, as my 4-year-old would say, we're going to take over the world. So let's get to it. I have Jennifer and Leslie here who have been Bootcamp members and then became mentors in Bootcamp. And I believe, Leslie, you've done it a couple of rounds now, and Jennifer at least once, if not twice. Is it once now or twice? They have lots of experience doing bootcamp, and so they've been through the bootcamp itself. So if we want to touch on questions on that, we can, but also a lot of the concepts around cultivating your confidence and really doing that self-discovery journey that we're all here for. So for those of you watching and don't know me by now, I'm Liz St. Jean. I have the Mint Ambition and I work with quietly ambitious professionals. And my area of specialty is around helping people with internal promotion. So positioning yourself for a promotion within your own organization. A lot of it applies to external as well, but my particular specialty is around internal. So with that, let's start with Jennifer. Let's start with you introducing yourself and then we'll go over to Leslie.
Thank you, Liz. My name is Jennifer Spire, and I work as the Director of Graduate Affairs at a university in Pennsylvania. And you're right, Liz, I've been working with you, I think maybe 2 go rounds with your work. And I just have to say that, I'm so happy to be here tonight because you have been such a help and an inspiration to me. I sort of found you through one of the boot camps that you did about working in a toxic workspace. And, for me, it was something that really resonated for me at the time. And I thought, I'm just going to learn about this. I don't know exactly where it's going to lead me. And I think now 2.5 years later, I have transitioned out of that particular role into another internal job in my same organization through the support of both you and Leslie and other mentors and other people in the boot camp and through the group, and it's really been helpful. So I'm happy to be able to give back and answer some questions tonight. So I'm really excited to be here, and thanks.
Awesome. And Jennifer gets the congrats as well. When she transitioned, she also negotiated herself an increase in salary. Okay, Leslie, let's hear from you.
Well, good evening, folks, or afternoon, depending on where people are. My name is Leslie Cordella, and I am from the DC area. I live in Virginia, and I come to you from the federal world, so not the private sector. And so I am a biologist, a wildlife biologist by trade, but through my career of 20 years in the federal government, I've really come to navigate through many waters of confusion about how to become a leader. What does leadership look like? It's not always a promotion. And so I've really gotten a lot out of working with Liz over the past few years through boot camp rounds and mastermind, where I've been able to externally process a lot of my thoughts. So I've had trouble a lot just focusing on some of the assignments that I've had to go back to them several times over, and that's actually a very helpful tactic. And being part of the program and being a mentor in the program really allows me to go through that and externally process it with other people who also benefit from doing the same thing. And over the time, I've really become more comfortable in speaking to a lot of people, especially virtually. I've become comfortable taking on detail roles and positions that I never would have imagined I would have done as a wildlife biologist. And it's just slowly given me the confidence to step outside of my usual comfort zone and learn to embrace the qualities that I have, learn to embrace the values that I bring to the table. And doing that in the federal world, which is a little bit different. And I will say that Liz she works with both. She works with both worlds, the private sector and the federal, or in the non-private. So it's a really good portfolio to be able to work with somebody like that.
Well, it's awesome to have you both here. So appreciate it. And Leslie used a term. This is something that I've been playing with, realizing there's a lot of people who come through kind of joining this never woulda club, that I never would have done that before. And I always think about, it's not a perfect analogy, but if anyone watched Friends, if anyone remembers the episode where Jennifer Aniston, Rachel, starts living with Joey, and she has the spaghetti and she drops the spaghetti on the floor, and he's just like, yeah, no problem. And she's like, I've never lived like this before. And I feel like we get a lot of that from the I never would have done that before. And that's part of this journey. And so everyone here who's here live too, you are also on this journey of change and transformation. And that's part of what growth is, right? Like if every 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24, however long, you're like, wow, I never would have done that before. Like if that is part of your journey, then we know we're having growth. Right? We're growing and we're trying new things, getting out of the comfort zone. So I love those intros. What I want to kick it off with is kind of like, let's just jump right into the deep end of this stuff. And with the question around imposterism. So whether it's imposter thoughts, imposter syndrome, or as one person, I loved how you phrased it, was feeling imposterish. And I would love to hear from both of you one at a time, but just talk a little bit about how you've navigated either time where you might have felt imposterish before, and how you shifted to more embracing that label of being a leader and embracing that role of leadership, whether it's positional or otherwise or informal. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So let's start with Leslie and then go to Jennifer.
Scenarios where I have felt imposterish. Wow. I typically do like to share my thoughts, so I'm very outspoken, but I always question whether those thoughts were beneficial to a conversation, or if they would add value. And so I would sort of subdue myself in a lot of meetings. That was reinforced by an external factor, which was in one area that I worked, I was actually told to be quiet because I was not a leader in the meeting. And that just sort of fed into me, and I felt sort of trained to not speak up. And then I realized how wrong that was, and that people did actually want to hear what I had to say. And over time, I take little steps. to get more comfortable with my own voice and stepping over my own voice and making mistakes and sometimes rambling, but then recognizing I'm rambling. And through the process, through boot camp, through mastermind, through a lot of the discussions that we've had, I hear about other people having the same issues. And you start to learn to listen to, well, I don't know, this is a preview, but your mentor on your shoulder, you have an inner mentor. And it's not just that voice that's telling you you shouldn't be there. There are other voices in there too in your head that you should listen to. This sounds crazy, doesn't it? Listen to all of the voices in your head, because that one that tells you you shouldn't be there is it's just the loudest. It doesn't mean it's the right one. And so it took practice, but now I'm actually very open if I feel imposterous. In fact, I will give you an example of just this summer. I found myself in a meeting with a bunch of senior leaders, and it was a topic that we've not really tackled before. And so we all felt a little bit new and green. And I actually offered to everybody, I said, by the way, if you're feeling like you have imposter syndrome just being at this table, please join me. I feel that way too, but I've decided to not listen to that voice. And I've decided to say, I have something to add here. And I had a lot of people come up to me afterwards, senior leaders, you know, up there beyond me, say thank you for saying that, because they felt the same way. This is a universally felt feeling. And hearing people say that and being open about it is, that's where I am in my journey. And that seems to be very helpful. So I went from wanting to quiet myself, even though I really want to talk a lot, to embracing what I can bring to the table, knowing that I can bring something to the table, even if I don't know what it is right away.
I think, I definitely second a lot of what Leslie said. And I think, what this work has done for me, in addition to that, it is that it has allowed me to be in a safe space that has put me in a room with really strong leaders and intelligent, well-spoken women who I'm seeing feel similarly, and help me to recognize that the thoughts that I'm having are actually on point and valuable and make sense. And then I feel confident sharing them in those spaces that make me feel confident then to share them in workspaces that feel more safe. And, as I transitioned into my new role, for me personally, a lot of it was about wanting to work in a place where I felt as though they wanted me. And that for me was really important. And so when I went through the journey of applying for a new position and going through the application process and being hired by somebody who I felt wanted me, that helped me to overcome a little bit of that imposter syndrome. I mean, I feel like I have a lot of the things that Leslie spoke to, but I feel myself reminding myself in my head that, they wanted me in the room. They brought me here for a reason. They believed that I, had the skill set and the knowledge base to be a valuable asset at the table. And so now I can speak up, and being part of this group and utilizing the tools that Liz shares allowed me to know when to speak up and when not to speak up, when to listen, and when to really just utilize my strengths. And so I feel like that's been really important for me in this space of imposter syndrome, and really recognizing that every single person experiences that. And when you start to watch people and you speak it, you recognize that every person at every level feels a version of that. And so you just have to kind of own that and then work your way through it in however works best for you, I think.
Yeah, so I'm hearing two big themes, or probably multiple, but two big themes. One of them being that kind of a combination of recognizing that lots of people feel this, you both highlighted that, and then also being opening up that space for conversation, which also fits with the, we have having these conversations. So a takeaway for everyone is being able to find a place where you can have that safe conversation, where you feel like you can just, put down any masks or any armor and be able to share openly and have those open conversations. And then a second part that I'm hearing too is it's almost like a calibration, right? Like finding a way, like through self-observation, which for today's part of Cultivate Your Confidence, right? It's all about self-observation and being really neutral, like observing with curiosity, neutrality, and just learning and then calibrating and be like, oh, I can speak up more here. Or in some cases, especially for anyone who's more extroverted, but like, there's other places where I can show up with listening. And it's learning that and practicing it. So we've got a couple of comments here. Valerie's saying it's reassuring for sure to know that it's a universal feeling. Absolutely. And then she'd added, we got here as well in the Q&A about a personal struggle is doubting myself, my credibility, my abilities to do my job well, even though it's always gone well enough. I know, right? Can everyone relate to that? Like everything's gone fine. And yet I doubt myself, like another universal experience. It's, the imposter syndrome or related. I've mostly had positive reviews, got promoted, got new jobs. And no matter what I accomplish or achieve, I still doubt myself every day and have anxiety that something might come up and I won't be able to take care of it, right? Really, I'm sure you just saw Jennifer and Leslie kind of smiling and nodding myself too, right? Really universal. And so she's kind of putting it out there in the universe, not really a specific question, but looking for advice. And I'll turn to the mentors. But one thing I will say for anyone who identifies with this, just know that you are not alone. And usually often what I find with clients is that it speaks to the level of integrity, the desire to make impact, right? We all heard Leslie talk about making contribution, right? It's about am I going to be having that impact? Am I making contribution? We really care about the work that we're doing. So then we start worrying and wondering about it. So it's a natural experience. So let's hear from Jennifer first. Any thoughts that came up for you when hearing that comment, and then we'll go to Leslie.
I can't remember if this was an exercise that we did, Liz, or if I did it somewhere else, but I feel like it must have been you, but maybe not. That somebody said to me once, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like if you go in and you do get fired or you can't do that, then what? And I will say I do, because I'm definitely the person that vocalizes every day, I'm going to be fired today, even, 2 months into my new job. I mean, it's just the words come out of my mouth. I can't really help it. And so, but I have really started that practice of really believing, like, should something happen and I don't end up here, like, what's the alternative? And it does help me to see that I would be okay. I have really strong skills. I am good at my job. And if for some reason things didn't work out, it's not all about me. It's about the circumstances, or it's about the situation or something else. And I would go on to do bigger and better things in other places. And it's really shifted my mindset a lot. And so that's kind of, I feel like, at least how I've been managing a lot of those same feelings that you put in that question.
Yeah, and it's very possible you also did this with someone else, but I remember that session in the group, and because it's a great question. Like you can, if you're thinking about a situation about how it might go wrong, and it can be really interesting just to get to a place where you sit back like, well, what if that happened? Okay, and just think through it, but kind of thinking through it from okay, so what would that look like? And being able to separate the thinking and the planning from the emotion. And sometimes it takes it can take a bit to get there. If that feels like the thought and the emotion are too kind of tightly entwined, that's really, really natural as well. But getting to a place where we can separate it out and see it. So this isn't about always being, perfectly, rational and thinking and logical, but being able to get to a place where we can see both sides and be able to step into that. Okay, so what would happen if I got fired? Well, okay, this is what it would be. And then you can start asking your question like, well, how likely is it really? Is it actually likely? and being honest, starting to be really honest with yourself and being able to get to a place where emotionally you can have that honest conversation with yourself. And Catherine says, that was so helpful, as I'm concerned about my boss not liking my input, but if he doesn't like my input, maybe I should be where my input is valued. Need to try to embrace that. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Leslie, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, so I like to look at when I'm spinning out and I'm starting to feel the anxiety and wondering if I'm the right person for this detail or this role. I'd like to think of where I was 10 years ago or where I was 20 years ago. If somebody asked me to do what I do now, even just 5 years ago, I think I might have freaked out. And so today, for example, I ran a budget meeting, which I've never done, with a bunch of people who are leaders of other programs in my federal agency. And I did a lot of prep work. I practiced talking about it, but I still felt like I was kind of nervous and spinning out a little bit before the meeting. What I started to do was a practice that we have done before, and what Liz has asked us to do before is remember those moments when you can remember a time 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when something like this would have just terrified you, or something that you would have done, something that you've gotten better at. Like, you've done this before. You have done this before. It didn't look like this. It maybe wasn't with those same people. But what you're nervous about and scared about right now, you've actually done it before. It just looked a little different. Or maybe there were 10 fewer people, or maybe the subject was something different. And so I like to think of those incremental improvements over time. My resilience, my strength, my ability has slowly gotten better over time. So when I think about where I was and I look backward, that's where my confidence can come from. That's what I've often used to combat that feeling of imposterism, whatever we're calling it. When you're climbing a mountain, everybody looks upward. But it's really important to look back to see how far you've come. And that is amazing. You can think about that. I just offer that as a way to reframe a situation to think about imposterism.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff in there. One of my mentors says, I love this too, and to think about is that so often when we're feeling nervous and we're in that, we've all been there, right? Like we've all been there. So we're spinning up about something. And when we really sit down to think about it, usually we can start to realize that we're mostly afraid of the emotional impact is usually what happens. What we're really nervous about is how we're going to feel. But then because it kind of intertwines with the circumstance and the thought and the emotion, right, to get to the cultivate your confidence work for today, actually, right, it all kind of intertwines and it's hard to separate out. So that's can be really important to think about. The other piece too, Leslie, you were talking about, where we've been. Okay, it'll come back to me. There was another good piece I wanted to tease out, but it just left my brain.
Happens to me a lot.
Which is all good.
I will add to one of the things that I am afraid of is like, what's the worst that could happen, is what Jennifer was saying. To me, often the worst that could happen is being asked a question that I simply cannot answer. But I think of all the other times I've been asked a question that is very hard to answer, and remembering that it's okay to not know everything. And that's the pressure that I put on myself, and that leads to my imposterism. And today, for example, in the meeting, people asked a lot of questions I couldn't answer, but they didn't know the answers either. None of us do. This is what the research is that we're working on. So it presents an opportunity for all of us to grow in the room. And so not knowing something can sometimes lead, or thinking you don't know something can lead to imposterism. But remember, it's okay to not know everything.
That is such a fantastic point. And so for anyone who's watching, who comes out of a field where either, especially in the scientific fields, maybe the tech fields, or anywhere where you might be a subject matter expert and you're making that shift, from subject matter expert into a more leadership role, that can be really difficult, because as we become leaders, and especially as you are actually moving up into higher level, more senior level leadership positions and executive positions, there's no, usually there's no right or wrong. People don't know the answers, and it's all about navigating that ambiguity and essentially making decisions in the face of not having enough information. And that is a really not a key skill, but also such a valuable skill, being able to make decisions without having all the information. And that can be really difficult. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's see, I'm just going to go check. Okay, again, just another reminder for anyone who's catching up live now. If you are here live with us, make sure to post any questions that you have either on Facebook, that's what I was just checking, or here in the Zoom room. Okay, we got another comment here. I work in human resources. I'm a director since January, and it comes with higher expectations than I'm used to. And it also means that I expect more of myself as well. Yeah, absolutely, those expectations. And so it's figuring out that place of balancing, right? I have these high expectations, and then also I need to be kind to myself and give myself grace and self-compassion as I'm working, not just, so there's two things there, right? Being in a place where there's higher expectations and also being new at it, right? So there's multiple ways of being kind to ourselves as we're striving towards these higher expectations. Okay, another question I was curious about is, what is something that, for the two of you, that you do differently now that you've kind of gone through, and especially so the folks watching this are part of Cultivate Your Confidence and Confidence Week, and so that's a lot about thinking about how am I thinking about things, and how is that impacting my emotions and my reactions to situations. What is, if anything, but probably there's some things, what is different now for you than when you first started this journey? So Jennifer, let's hear from you first, and then Leslie.
Well, I think one of the main reasons that I was drawn to working with you after that first boot camp is this idea of the energy levels and the energy work. And I think that speaks directly to this question, because for me, I'm very self-aware. And I really put a lot of pressure on myself with regard to how I react and how I act in certain circumstances. And so for me, I've really tried to spend a lot of time learning about and thinking about the various energy levels and how I bring myself and my energy to different scenarios. And instead of reacting to situations, how I can choose how I handle situations, and not just let situations play out in a way that maybe they always have. And if I choose to do something in a way that maybe I always have, then that's a choice that I've made, but not just do something because I always have. And I tend to be somebody who, is comes to things as a fighter, as combative, I think is something that I tend to do a lot. And so in the work that I've done here, I really stop and think about it and try to make a choice. And so that, I feel like, is something that I've made a constant change, and really worked very hard to, and continue to work hard to. And I feel like that's part of this work. And I think this session, those of you who are here or maybe listening are maybe trying to decide if they're going to participate in one of your boot camps or any of these things. And I think that, one of the benefits for me has been being part of the group and really meeting all of the different people and getting to hear how different people manage these types of circumstances and how people learn. And so for me, you can go through the various energy levels and read them. And that's one thing, but actually practicing, this is a scenario and how would you handle it? And hearing how Leslie handles it, just listening to the cadence of Leslie's answers as a leader, versus the cadence of my answers as a leader, is helpful to me, because I don't get to work with leaders that speak and talk like Leslie or other people or Liz always. And so to be in a room with 8 to 10 people that have different leadership styles, but that I respect, is really, really has been really, really beneficial to me. And so that's been, I think, something that's been really beneficial.
Thanks for sharing. And so for anyone who has not taken one of my workshops before, what Jennifer is talking there about is the energy levels, and it's a framework called the energy leadership, and there's 7 energy levels. So just make sure you're there either live or the Thursday live class, or catch the replay, and you'll learn all about them. I'll be sharing all about them. And then the other takeaway from what Jennifer shared is kind of reiterating, I think I was mentioning that earlier, is that, whether you were working with me or not, but there's so much value in finding that safe group, finding a small group where you can open up. So if you have access to that somewhere, myself, and we got Jennifer here as well, just highly encouraging it. I love, Jennifer, what you said there too about just getting into a space where I love that phrase in the cadence, right? The cadence of but then also hearing other people's thoughts and their thought process and how they see a situation. That's something that's also so beneficial as a leader, being able to seeing other people's perspectives, but in a slightly different way. We often hear about that. You hear about that, especially in the emotional intelligence field, right? Leaders in emotional intelligence and being able to be empathetic towards others. But there's something slightly different about perspective taking, which is really shifting into, so it's not just emotions, not just being about empathetic or stepping into their shoes from that place of how they're feeling and how they're doing. There is that, but then there's also seeing, okay, how do they see things from a strategic perspective? How do they see things from what's important to them? How do they see things from what they're trying to accomplish for their teams? There's a holistic aspect to it. It can be really beneficial. And that really grows when you're in a circle of people, when you're talking about, when your topics come up and you get to hear those different perspectives. And it's similar but different so for anyone who attends, I'm sure we all do, right? So attend lots of meetings, you hear different perspectives, but it's kind of different when you're in a meeting where you're kind of either negotiating or problem solving, you're actually working on the problem. It's very different to go to a room where you're actually, you're developing. It's metacognition of learning about learning and thinking about how other people are learning. And sometimes that can be challenging to do in an actual work environment, right there in the room, because you're thinking about the actual problem versus finding a space where you can actually think about how you think about the problem. I know Leslie always laughs. I know she always laughs. I talk about things at the meta level, and I always get a laugh out of her. Okay, so Leslie, your thoughts on, or you share some of your stories about what's different for you. How do you approach things differently? Yeah,
I think the biggest things that are different for me, and I mean, this is adding on to what Jennifer said, because everything she talked about with the energy levels, that's been hugely impactful for me. But there's the self-awareness piece of that she talked about. Okay, so instead of just reacting and thinking that your emotional response is true, you can be more aware and really kind of separate yourself from that and still honor it. So I think one of the things that I like to do is, when something doesn't go my way, when I feel potentially hurt or let down or disappointed, the past Leslie used to say, well, however I'm feeling, that's the truth. I'm hurt, therefore I should be hurt. Or why did they ask me to be part of this team? I shouldn't be here. Things like that. And then Liz might say to me, well, what do you think it could also mean? So she's not asking me to dishonor those initial feelings. What else could it mean? Okay. What do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean? And I've started asking myself that question. And what I want things to mean, I want things to mean something impactful, positive, honorable, things that I can do to make this world a better place for all of us and wildlife. And So that's a new tactic that I've really learned to embrace. Liz also talked about perspective taking. I don't know, as empathetic as I like to think I am, I don't know if I was always very well practiced at perspective taking. And going through the boot camp several times as a mentor gives me a lot more practice. And that has been really impactful for me, so that I no longer believe the stories I make up in my head about what other people might be thinking about my presentation, or how I just explained something, or the fact that I don't know the answer to something. So not believing all the stories that you come up with in your head, because we all do, everybody does. And I think this is one of Brene Brown's biggest things. The story I'm telling myself is, you don't like what I'm saying right now. Why? Why would I think that? So I don't need to believe the stories that my brain just comes up with as a means to protect itself from disappointment. And being aware of that is that's a new thing. That's something that I've been learning too. So those are changes that I've learned to make, that I can point to from learning in this program, amongst many others.
Yeah, the stories. And this is where, we're halfway, kind of half-ish way through Cultivate Your Confidence. So everyone who started the workbook, today's workbook, you're going to start seeing that around separating the thoughts. And I mentioned it a couple times already, but we get into those stories. And it's so interesting when we start realizing, oh, the thoughts I have about a situation are different than the situation itself. And that's kind of like your brain can wrap around the axle if that's the very first time you've heard it. Like if this Cultivate Your Confidence is the first time you come across that, that's a bit of a mind warp, and you probably, and often there can be, we have some natural resistance to it. You're like, well, no, like my boss is just a jerk. That's just the truth. That's just capital T truth. And it can be really interesting when you start getting used to recognizing what I think about a situation. And oh, just one second here. Might have a little bit. Okay, here we go. Doing this with the okay, I'm gonna leave. Okay, here we got a little visitor here. Hey monkey, my little cheetah. Let me take my call right now.
I would love to take a moment to respond to Valerie in the chat.
Yes, do that if you can.
Yes, I would love to do that. So Valerie is saying, work with a director, or you are a director since last January, comes with a lot of high expectations that you're used to, and so you expect more of yourself. And I don't know if you can chat any more about that, but I wanted to offer that my husband recently noticed this about me. I am constantly resetting a bar for myself. And so I'll meet an expectation. I'm like, well, that was easy. I guess I'm not that great. And so I'll raise the bar, and then I'll do it again, and then I'll do it again. And so I'm not even satisfying myself. I'm not even celebrating those wins, because I might think, well, that was too easy. And I'm still learning how to navigate that. But gosh, I'm much more aware that I do it now, that I'm literally constantly raising the bar on myself, and I'm punishing myself, not celebrating my own wins. And I'm still learning how to do that. Okay, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I feel like that's a really good thing for me to explore, how to celebrate those wins instead of disregarding them and then just raising the bar again. So I just offer that as something to chew on, but I don't have any answers yet. Still working on it.
That was so good. And we've got Valerie in the chat saying yes. So it definitely resonated. Jennifer, did that bring up anything for you? Any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, well, I will say that I struggle extremely with celebrating wins and even being able to articulate wins, to be honest. The person that I was working with when I found Liz, I did a program, and every week we had to come to the class and articulate what positive thing happened that week. And I'll be frank, I could never even find something to talk about for myself. And so I will say that it really is important, I think, what Leslie is saying in any regard. And it's important as a director, especially, to be able to really, not only for yourself, but for your team. And I don't know if you manage a team of people or just yourself or whatever, to be able to really articulate expectations, to be able to bring that to the team and talk about, what you did well that week as a team, as an individual, and talk about those things in positive ways, and then talk about them, because I think that everyone struggles with those things. And the more you can bring that to the surface and help people be able to do that as a leader is really, really important. That's kind of what that makes me think of.
And I'm going to share something. Jennifer and Leslie, you might recognize this. So one of the weeks in boot camp, we talk about strengths, and in the debrief, let me just check here because I saw a chat come in. Yeah. Thanks, Valerie, for posing the question. So let me just share, I'll see my screen, right? Do you remember this? I think Leslie's remembering this. So this is often what I find growth kind of feels like. And reason I realized this was because, so people, when they start boot camp, if they do, there's a self-discovery journal, and you can assess yourself as to where you are. And then at the end, we do the same. And over time, I started noticing was people would come in and assess themselves kind of like, oh, I'm a 3 or a 4 on this particular skill. And then by the end of the boot camp, they're up here. But then they come back as a mentor, or they take mastermind, or they work with me one-on-one, and I ask them to assess themselves, and they assess themselves down here. Like, wait, what is going on here? And so, this is maybe we're not all aware of it, but this is like growth ends up feeling like this. And no one ever says they're a 9 or a 10, not in my world. Never would I ever say I'm a 9 or a 10. And you don't really end up feeling down here. And this is what I realized. Here's what I want to share with everyone watching, is that this is what growth usually looks like. And this is what I realized what was happening, is that we start out here at some point and we go to a 10, and then we go to the next level of whatever it is, whether it's strategic thinking, professional confidence, communication, budget. Leslie talked about budget earlier, whatever it is, supervision, whatever. As we grow, of course we drop. Of course we're going to drop because we're at a different level, right? It might sound a little bit bad, but it's almost like the hubris involved for us to think that we would go to the next level and just automatically be at an 8. Of course, of course we're not there. But this is what's happening over time, is that we're growing. But at each individual level, we might start out somewhere between, maybe not at a 1, but somewhere lower on the scale. Then we grow, and then we move up a level, and move up and move up and move up. So I just wanted to share that with people, to share that concept that we're constantly growing, and we see room for growth, and we can see the length that we've already grown. There's a concept, and I haven't read the book yet. The book's a little bit more for entrepreneurs and running a business and the mindset around that. But there's a concept called the gap and the gain. And the idea is that we're so often looking at the gap between where we are and where we want to be that we forget to look at the gain, where we were and where we've gotten to. And that talks to, Leslie, what you mentioned earlier, right? About sometimes I look back and realize goodness, look how far I've come. This is amazing, right? And no matter what that journey is, our journeys are so interesting and so different. And especially if we've had any kind of confidence hits, right? I talk about that a lot on the registration page for this event, but experiencing confidence hits, right? So sometimes you might look at the gain, you look back, you're like, oof, yeah, that was a deep gully I had to climb through to get here. And now it came back to me, and I'm gonna look at the chat here in a second, because something, Leslie, that you said, what made me think about, and we've talked about this recently on some of the mastermind different places, but if we're looking at something and we're feeling nervous about it, or anxious, not really sure how it's going to go, or something's not going well, or we're having conflicts, or all those sorts of things, and we're feeling at the effect. So you're going to learn, a sneak preview, you're going to learn about it on Thursday. It's called call it victim energy. When we are at the effect of things are impacting us. When that happens, what I love is to ask myself, it's sit down with myself. We're going to sit down and talk to each other here. We're going to have a little conversation. to Leslie's other point earlier about the two little voices we have. But it's to sit down and think, what's the story I'm going to tell about this 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or this, however things are happening. It's like, this is not the story. This is not my story. I have a different story to tell, and I'm going to make that story happen. And the actual circumstances might not go the way we, necessarily want or plan for, but the emotional story or the energetic story of how I show up, I'm in charge of that story. I'm in charge of the story of how I showed up with this going on with the circumstances. And what is the story that I want to tell now? So I want to share that. And that was Leslie's comment in there about printing or drawing and having on the fridge. Yeah, we can do that. So something to think about, right? When we're having these experiences, having these situations, the story I'm going to tell, like a different variation of that story theme. So again, anyone who's here live with us, whether you're here on Zoom or in Facebook, please post your questions or thoughts. I've got eyes on all places. Or if you're here on Zoom, you can do the raise hand if you want to come on live and chat, and I can move you over. But Jennifer, what's coming up for you now with all the things we've been talking about?
Well, I was just thinking when you said that, the exercise that we did once about the vision board is sort of similar to that, right? Because, I feel like for me, it is hard to sort of envision what something's going to look like down the road. And so that exercise, I was very surprised by, because I really was like, I'm not going to, like, this is not going to be a big deal for me, or I'm not going to, really get much out of it, to be honest. But I sat down and said, like, what do I want to, see a change in my life, or something like that. I can't really remember how I approached it, but I really just sat back and said, how can what do I envision for myself? And I'll let you explain about the vision board. But for me, it was really just stopping and thinking about, I ended up going back through my photos and just looking at some pictures of myself and my favorite things. And it really gave me a moment to reflect on, when have I been the happiest and in what experience? And all of a sudden I had this it felt like a shift of, like, that's just how I physically want to feel, and how can I bring that feeling into my work and the attitude that I have, and how I'm going to move forward as I make these choices in my work. And it really made a difference that I wasn't expecting. And so I think Leslie's suggestion of printing that out and looking at it, or, doing these exercises where you actually write it down or do it, is something that we're sort of like, oh, I sometimes do this where I'm talking and I'm like, not going to do the exercise. I just think through it. But the actual act of taking a pen to paper really just makes such a big difference. And I think pushes you into that next level where you can actually make a change that you didn't expect you were going to make.
Actually, Jennifer's comment there is a nice segue to one of the other things that we're getting a little bit more tactical here. Maybe we'll see what your answers are. Is for a lot of people, for most of us, is that we want to do professional development, we want to do leadership development, or we want to take time and do the things, but it just feels like we don't have enough time, right? It's just like everything's on fire, and we've got our personal lives, and we're trying to do everything, and professional development or personal development kind of falls to the back burner, is like the last thing on the list. So I'd be curious to hear from the two of you. What would you say if someone was like, oh, I'd love to do more this kind of development work or self-discovery, but I just don't have the time for it. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, well, I will say that you have worked in a lot of flexibility into the boot camp, and that accessing the resources is it's been pretty simple. And so even if you can't sit down for an hour, I found that if you can just sit down for 15 minutes and go through one part of it or revisit it. That seems to really help. And, and just being open about that with Liz. Like, let's say you signed up and it doesn't look like you're going to make a call. It's really helpful to just be upfront about that. And because Liz tends to work with people who are juggling a lot and understands. I mean, her kiddo just walked in, and it's perfectly normal to have that happen. And she's juggling that, so she gets it. And I'll just offer that. I've had nothing but good experiences if I've had to miss a call, or I've had to catch up with somebody, or catch up with Liz outside of the normal time. So there's flexibility there, and she offers a lot of tactics too to help you structure it in and maybe prioritize a little bit. Okay, well, what is the part of this that you really do want to work on? Let's focus on that. Let's focus on that. And then maybe if the other stuff is less important, I've also seen Liz like totally reframe an assignment to offer you different ways of going about it. There's just so much flexibility that works into this that you come out of it with a lot of stuff, even if you're strapped for time. And then there's this one session I believe you offered, Liz. It was a whole calendar exercise on trying to create your calendar, work on your priorities, and that was really helpful, I have to say. So there's tools and tips and tricks and all kinds of things that you go through, but it's really important to be honest with yourself and upfront about it, to help yourself prioritize. So yeah, honesty with self is probably the most important thing. This is what I really want to do, or do I really need to be doing everything? Do I have to be everything to everybody while I learn? There's a lot of important questions you have to ask yourself. So.
Yeah, so I'm hearing is if we extrapolate, because I mean, I love for people to join Bootcamp, but not everyone will. If you're extrapolating to if you're looking at your different options, looking for flexibility, so things that are flexible, that aren't kind of expecting you to do 100% of everything all the time every week, that's going to take you 6 hours a week. Unless you have time for that, in which case you probably didn't care about this question in the first place. So having flexibility, and then that honesty with self, and there's a piece there that was kind of a thread within Leslie's answer, is that compassion for self, and saying, I can do that. I can do this. I can't do all of it. I can't give 100% of myself because I've got a lot of other things going on, but I can give a bit, and I can probably get a lot back giving a bit. That's a big thing I'm big on, is the 80-20 rule. If anyone hasn't heard of it, where can I give 20% effort to get 80% impact or 80% return? And a lot of times professional development, leadership development can be like that, is that, because we can be like, oh, I can't give myself fully, so I won't do it. But if we even just do a bit of it, we get a huge return, and you just do that over time, and you're going to get to that place instead of waiting for the perfect moment. Because for most of us, it's not really a perfect time for anything.
There's no such thing as perfect timing for things. I know, but you're so right, Liz. Like, that's what I meant, I think, by being honest with yourself and showing yourself some compassion. Are you setting the bar really high and trying to keep everything at 100% while you also add something? I mean, I know that there are lots of scenarios and cases out there, especially with family care and things like that, that are really important. And I'm not saying, ditch those. It's a matter of honesty with self and analysis. Do you really need to give 100% of yourself all the time to everything else, while you're also trying to devote that energy to yourself and to your growth?
And Jennifer, your thoughts, especially because I think you were coming, it was like 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. on a Saturday when you were coming. So you were fitting things in there. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I just found it to be very non-judgmental. And for me, that was really important, because I'll be honest, I often didn't do all the assignments, and I'm a perfectionist in my work life and my job. And so for me, not always doing the most was really hard to do, but I think I had made a commitment to really just wanting to do better, and so if doing better in my head meant showing up at 8 o'clock or whatever time, 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And that was the best I could do, even if I hadn't read all the materials or done all the assignments. That was sort of the commitment that I made in my head. And honestly, I got so much out of those conversations and didn't feel judged or didn't feel like I was less than because I hadn't done the assignments, that it worked out. And having the option to continue to go through it multiple times and to be able to go back over the materials and have access and being able to have conversations with people, whether they were my mentors or just people that I had connected with offline, and we had separate meetings with, we would go back and talk about things. So for me, I feel like that would be my advice, is to just, if this is something that you feel is something that is needed in your life because you feel out of control or you feel like you want to make a difference, that however you can bring yourself to do one thing, that one thing will lead to the next one thing, that will lead to the next one thing, kind of like the little ladder that we just saw, and you bring growth that way. And to have people that will support you in whatever you do is really nice, because you can't necessarily always find that in your job. And so this was a good place to do that for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it probably is helpful when the coach is so not a perfectionist. So it is totally fine to show up. But that was the thing that I find, okay, I joke, but the bigger takeaway is that just how important it is to show up. And so often we kind of see like, oh, did I do all the readings, or did I do the exercise? And like, that is helpful. Like they're definitely, any program you go into, well, assuming you're looking at programs with people with the right backgrounds, they've all been thought through, right? All the exercises, everything there is for a reason, but you don't have to do everything. And in fact, that actually speaks to the other piece I talked about, like getting used to making decisions without all the information, getting used to showing up without having done everything and being okay with it. And also showing up with that self-compassion, being like, because a lot of people I find come to these programs used to, with that high bar of expectations, doing everything, not just doing everything, but doing it perfectly. And so it is a bit challenging to go into a program and be like, oh, it's okay if I didn't get everything done. And that can be even a transformation of getting used to that. If you're very busy, looking for a program that has flexibility and that you can show up without having to have done everything. And then that is a good practice in taming the inner perfectionist. Okay, we're coming right up onto the hour here. So what last thoughts do either of you want to share about this topic around confidence and overcoming the imposterism?
Just in short, what I would say is that, confidence is definitely something that is internal and you can't let other people drive your confidence, but we all do that. And so, having the ability to have tools or a toolbox where you can go to and be able to control your thought process in that world and in feeling confident is just so important. Because if you're even thinking a little bit about this, right? If you're on this call, if you're listening to this conversation, if you're at the end of this recording, it's obviously important. This topic is important to you. And so you've started the conversation. And so therefore, finding tools that can help you navigate the space, I think is the first step. And so I think, the odds are you are somebody with confidence, and you need to just sort of work through it to find that. And whether it's a program like this, or reading books, or talking to your friends or family, or going out and taking a hike, or doing whatever it is to make yourself, just feel secure in the moment. I think that, it's really important to just feel confident in the work that you do. So.
Thank you, Leslie.
This gets back to the question around one of the changes that I've seen happen, and that is embracing those strengths that I have instead of fighting them. Not everybody has had that, but coming from a science background, but also realizing that I'm love working with people and I don't necessarily need to be that quiet scientist that is just over there by themselves. I always envision leadership in the wildlife world as being that quiet published scientist that never really talks to people. And I was very short-sighted because we need a lot more people that have empathy skills and can connect with human beings in the conservation world. And I didn't realize I had those skills. And so I always sort of shunned them because they seemed like soft skills, you know? Well, it turns out those are really needed. And so that actually learning that I had something to offer gave me confidence. And I don't think I would have really understood that I had those skills if I hadn't gone to go through this self-discovery journey. So really understanding who you are and what does come easy for you, so that when you're in those blue squares that in the zones that Liz talks about in her video and you're stretching out into a non-comforting zone, remembering those strengths that you bring to the table, gosh, that really helps not feel as overwhelmed because you can lean into those things that you're just that come more naturally to you or that you do very well. And that is so grounding and beautiful. And that grounding gives you confidence. And so I just explore what those strengths you do have and how you can apply them. And that is a great way to reinforce the confidence that you have.
Amazing. Well, thank you both. Thank you on behalf of everyone who is here live and everyone catching the replay. Super, super fun to have you here. Have yourself a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Now, before you go, make sure you click to follow the show. This way, you don't have to go looking for the latest episode. I'll come to you. Just click the plus button or the follow, and you'll get the latest episode fresh off the press. Thanks again, and remember that you are amazing. Now get out there and rise.